Welcome to Design Thinking Games, a fantasy and user experience podcast. Each episode, your podcast hosts, Tim Broadwater and Michael Schofield, will examine the player experience of board games, pen and paper role-playing games, live-action games, mobile games, and video games. You can find every episode, including this one, on your podcatcher of choice and on the web at designthinkinggames.com.
This episode is brought to you by listeners like you at patreon.com/designthinkinggames. So I've actually wanted you all to meet for a while now because Mike Schofield had me on his podcast when I was doing UX in higher education. His podcast is Metric, a UX podcast. And then last year, oh my God, was it I think it was last year.
I think it was the end of season 3.
Yeah, so I was on the Drunken UX podcast. So, and then that is kind of something to where being a guest on those two.
Oh, nice. Like he's holding up your book. That's UX FMK at your local Amazon.
Yeah, so really all the three people that are here actually inspired me to really want to do a UX podcast. So Michael Schofield, Michael Fienen, Aaron Hill.
Hello.
Yeah, I like that this is some sort of meet and greet, even though we asked you to come on the podcast.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you guys are our first interview. We haven't done one before, and we just thought it was cool that we could get some folks on who likely have a ton of overlap, right? Where we all do UX work to some degree professionally. We write or publish or talk a lot about UX, and guarantee that we're all gamers.
Say it doesn't hurt that I've got 100 board games over in my closet. So
mine are on the other side of that wall right there.
Oh, for real.
Nice.
all the books back here on the bookshelf in the video, that's all role-playing games.
Oh, nice. Yeah, right here, my top shelf is all the board games from my A-list. I actually went through a thing this spring to where if it wasn't a definite keeper game or maybe, then I gave the game to Goodwill. And so there was a lot.
Those are the best games Goodwill has had a long time.
Probably.
Every once in a while, you get some choice titles there. I've picked up a couple of good ones from my childhood at Goodwill.
Yeah, so the Design Thinking Games podcast, kind of to what Michael said, is really kind of still finding, I think, its footing. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of under this experiment or idea that people who are UXers actually really like games. And we thought that this is probably, there's potentially something here. And then I would say over the course of season 1, we kind of had that confirmed on social media to where a lot of UXers love like gaming. And so there's this also intersect between player experience and user experience.
UX folks like journeys, right? Like crafting journeys and customer journeys, user journeys is a big part of the work. And the journey of a player through a game is kind of like not to go ahead and jump the shark early, but it's the gamified version of that, and that process of starting out somewhere, going through transactional things, trying to complete certain goals, and come out the other end with your thing done, so to speak.
I agree.
I find that, I've done some amateur game design, and what I find is that, the parts of my brain that I use when thinking about UX in web or in app design is very similar to the parts of my brain I'm using when I'm trying to determine how to model something, model a concept in a game interaction. It feels like a very similar experience from a creative perspective.
Earlier this year, we were taught, or Tim introduced me to this idea. I don't know if he named it. I feel like we stumbled on a name for it, but this idea of operator agnosticism, where when you're designing, let's say a dashboard in a web app, the tendency is to say like, oh, let's take WordPress or whatever. These are bloggers who are going to do X, and they're going to need this variety of toggles, and they want to see this information on their list of blogs in their dashboard. Whereas the reality is like what's happening is that the job to be done doesn't really care about your role, whether you're a blogger or you're like an SEO marketer or you have some other title that you're all still using the same kind of like writing experience in WordPress. And so the idea of operator agnosticism is that like, build a table that gives in this case, the user choice about what they see in it. Like if they don't want this column, let them hide it. And you see that a lot in like in games as well, that the games that have lately in the last few years been like game of the year or otherwise get a whole bunch of praise are those that really like allow players to choose and like set the parameters for how they experience that game.
Can I throw a really bad example of that at you?
No, dude.
I hope that when I say this, your instinct is to cringe, but bear with me. Monopoly. So everybody hates Monopoly.
I literally
right?
was just at a mall where there's an entire shelving section of like Monopoly knockoffs.
All the
It's like The
Monopolies,
Simpsons
right?
Monopoly,
So-
Star Wars Monopoly.
But here's why I bring that up, because while most people who are like gamers will say, no, Monopoly is actually a terrible game, and it is, one of the reasons I think it has really held on and lasted is because of the amount of customization that is possible within that rule set. And, that home rule instinct. Do you pay all your tax money to free parking, or does it go to the bank? Do you collect $200, or do you get to go to an unclaimed property? People home rule all kinds of things around that to make it not just more fun to them, but more palatable, more accessible, and it makes it feel like their own, and none of that feels like it breaks the game at any point.
There's a whole like cultural expression around that, right? Like
yeah.
Like how like you meet a family and you play Monopoly or something, and it's like, well, how do you play it? What are your rules?
Yeah.
No, exactly. You can tell a lot about a person about like how much of a jerk they are, right? Especially if you like get into I don't know if like Monopoly actually like specifies rules about how you haggle, right? And how you like trade. But
loosely.
But yeah, you can,
I've had to look at the rules not long ago. It's loose.
Oh my god!
I'm gonna say something and then not expand on it, but let's just say, depending on how many clothes are lost during the course of a Monopoly game, that can also tell you a great deal about your group.
I will say I have played that version of Monopoly more than once.
When you play Monopoly and literally lose your shirt playing.
Yes, that's what that means. Yes.
Like in Monopoly, the rules that I find people frequently don't know, and some of these you probably know all of these, but maybe not for the listeners. Like one is like Michael mentioned, do you put your money on free parking when you pay taxes or whatever? And like free parking is just free parking. But another one that I think a lot of people don't know is that when you land on a property, if you choose not to buy it, it's supposed to immediately go to auction.
Right.
And that's one way that the game gets sped up a lot, because you can land on a property and then choose not to purchase it at list price, hoping that you can get it for a cheaper price, and that someone else won't steal it from you. And then the other one is just that like there's no bonus money. The only money that gets added into the game's economy is pass and go. So there's a regular addition of $200 per player each time you go around the board, adding into the game's economy, but that's it. And so the game should actually be very fast. You can do a game of Monopoly if you play by the book in 30 minutes or less.
Really?
Insane.
Yeah.
Never has happened.
And playing it by the book, it's not a bad game. Like it's cutthroat, and like what it says about we live in a society, like that is obviously terrible. But I mean, game design wise, like it's not bad. It's very tight. It's very controlled. It has all the hallmarks of like a general interactive type game, but people don't play by the rules. They like to make up their own because nobody likes to lose. And the game is built to be like the crushing loss of capitalism.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I was just going to say something like semi-profound, like, oh, what an interesting case study that the game transcended its own rules.
I don't think I've ever actually played it the right way then.
Check the rules out.
We always start with 200, or no, you start with double money and instead of having to go around the board once. And then, if you can't buy it, then, someone never can buy it unless another person lands on it. Or just like all of these home rules that I don't even know where they came from.
So you want to go down a rabbit hole here with like the UX thing. Let's talk Monopoly. Let's talk good Monopoly. There is a game, I believe Z-Man produced it, that in my opinion is every bit as good as Monopoly. It's all the good stuff about Monopoly with none of the bad, and it's Chinatown. Chinatown brings in the aspect of property ownership, the concept of a monopoly without it being exactly that, but this idea of you're trying to collect sets of things because they're worth more money. And it has all of the haggling. Now, you know how in Monopoly, one of the hardest things is trying to get the properties you need from the people they have them, because it's such an inequitable choice, when you're trying to trade people in Monopoly, because usually it means you want both people to get something useful, but one guy is obviously trying to bend somebody backwards a little bit, or you're literally on their hotel and have no money, and so you're like handing over properties. Chinatown takes that and makes it fun and equitable, because you can haggle over something that you're like, yeah, man, this is going to make you a lot of money, but because of the way the game plays out, it's not necessarily going to make you a lot of money now, and it may not make you a lot of money later. It could. And so there's this exchange of businesses that can happen and where they're located and all of this. To me, it's like they sat down and talked about what makes Monopoly, what would make Monopoly fun. People love haggling. They love that action. They just don't like the way it works in Monopoly. They like ownership. They like trying to complete things. And so they got rid of pieces moving around the board and all of that. You get money every turn still. You make money from your businesses. I really have found a lot of fun in that. And it also doesn't feel like it draws it out. A lot of games where it's user interaction and like trying to like argue with people or things, those games feel like they can really draw out on over time. Chinatown resists that.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. It's rated really well on Board Game Geek, and which of course is my KPI for if I purchase a game, and the real power value of Board Game Geek. But that's actually one of the things that I think, like when you play Here to Slay or Munchkin or things like that, to where it's like, let's haggle to see if we can take someone down or if we can buff the monster.
Yeah.
Or like stack more on it. The haggling in Monopoly to me always felt just kind of like, are you gonna let me slide this month, or do I get to it? Or are you gonna take me to the bank, and I have to like, exchange all of my property and to pay you off, and then it just seems really
there's
brutal.
no depth to it, and there's no way to add depth to it. It's a very superficial kind of like haggling that happens in Monopoly. And that's why I guess it works better in Chinatown, because it plays out over, I think, 6 rounds, 6 or 9, I can't remember now. And it's like the way you haggle in the next to last round is vastly different from how you haggle in the first round, because you only have so much time to make any money. The other way this works, I think, is, in Monopoly, the game is predetermined well before it finishes, right? Like, who's gonna win before they win. Chinatown does a really good job of obfuscating the horse race a little bit, so you don't necessarily feel like, oh god, they're so far ahead I can't catch them. You have stacks of money, but that money changes every turn. It consolidates, and you don't have to show it to anybody. And so that makes the game a lot more fun, I think, because you do feel like even up to that end you have a chance, whereas Monopoly, it's like, I'm going to go one more round, and if I land on one of your properties, I'm done for. I need you to land on 14 of my properties. This is over.
Here's some Monopoly trivia for you. Well, first, Another obscure rule is that if you own a Monopoly, rent is doubled, even without houses. A lot of people don't know that. It's written on the title deeds, but not everybody reads those.
So you said you've played Monopoly recently, then?
Yeah, well, I have kids.
Is it good for kids? I don't even know what the age rating is on it, to be honest.
With house rules, sure.
I played it pretty young, actually. I remember playing it in our first house, and I think we were out of there by the time I was 8.
I remember also playing it very young, like at my grandparents'. It's like the only board game my grandparents had.
Yeah, same. We would play it when you went to like the seashore and stuff. Or I would go to the Jersey Shore or something and play Monopoly. So here's the trivia. One of the properties, the colored properties on the board, is not a street. Do you know which one it is? They're all
one
real
of the
locations.
colored properties on the board, but it's not a street.
Mm-hmm. Not the railroads, not the free parking or whatever. One of the colored properties. Nope. The colored properties that you can buy, one of them is not a street.
I'd have to.
Parkway. I don't know.
The one that jumps to me is like Marvin Gardens.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Marvin Gardens.
I can't believe you remembered that.
That
That's
was
crazy.
a housing development. I think it's gone. But it was in the early 1900s. It existed in Atlantic City. Every other one of the places were actual streets in Atlantic City at the time.
Marvin Gardens.
So there's a book by, I think I read this when I was a kid. I'm pretty sure it's this one, by Philip Urbains. It's called Monopoly, the world's most famous game and how it got that way. And it's fascinating. There's all kinds of great trivia there. The Marvin Gardens thing, though, I found from John McPhee. He wrote, it was called In Search of Marvin Gardens in his book Pieces of the Frame. And it was about about the history of Monopoly, but also like him literally looking for Marvin Gardens in Atlantic City.
Oh, nice. I kind of want to know, like, what's on everyone's hot plate right now. Like, what game are you obsessed with, or what have you giving
easy
like some time to?
Diablo 2.
Really?
Oh, right, that just came out, right? The remaster.
Yeah.
It's a remaster of the computer game.
Yeah.
Or was Diablo 2 computer?
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day.
2000. So it is 21 years old. And if you want to feel like you've lost track of time, Diablo 3 is 9 years old.
Oh my god.
Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that hurts, doesn't it?
A little bit.
It does.
Diablo 2.
Wait, so is it good?
It's Diablo 2.
It's Diablo 2.
I mean, but like
that means yes, it's good.
Did they
change anything about it? Or like, did they fix anything or?
So I mean, this I think is actually a kind of a great topic for you guys as much as anything because of what they changed. They came out and said, we're not making the next iteration of Diablo. That's what Diablo 3 was. Diablo 3 was good. My only complaint about it really was that it was very short feeling by comparison to the other games. And I don't know if that was just objective or subjective rather, but it felt very short. Diablo 2 always felt long. It felt big. It had a lot to it. You could do a lot. So they're like, this is the original game. If you haven't played it, or I mean, if you are playing it but haven't switched it back and forth between legacy mode and new mode.
I love it when they do that.
Man. Command and Conquer did that too. Also a game from my childhood, so of course I bought it. But the difference between those is very worth just looking at. One big thing they did though was we have a lot more power with regard to accessibility in games now. And so they did a lot more with transcription of all of the voice audio that is in the game. They've given you a lot of options for like color palette, color blindness stuff. You do things like auto pick up gold now. You're not trying to click up, click every single little piece of gold to try to get it. So they've tried to help with motor control. They have an article on their website about like how they sat down and said, how would we do this now, knowing what we know about game design for people with disabilities.
That's cool.
But, yeah,
it's nice. Love the grind in that game. Like,
wow,
it was just fun to like go into dungeons and grind and get experience, and gold. What about you, Aaron?
I'm just currently being wowed by the Diablo 2 preview you just shared. It's awesome. I'm gonna have to check this out. Let's see. Board game wise, I've been rotating through a few different ones. I've been going to a weekly board game night, and that's been fun. So I get to try out a lot of games that I haven't tried ever before. I think the one that's probably been in hot rotation just because it's fun and easy to play with new people is Splendor, the gem trading game.
Mhm.
I got the expansion for that, so we've been playing some of the expansions. Video game wise, most recently I replayed my I was showing someone Sonic the Hedgehog 1. And I was replaying it and I was like, oh yeah, like if you get all the Chaos Emeralds, then you could turn into Super Sonic. But I got Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 mixed up, and so on Sonic 1 it's just a different ending. But I did do it though.
Nice.
I never saw the ending to any of those Genesis era Sega games.
They're
Like,
pretty brutal.
I never got past like the third level of either of the Sonics, Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, the only canonical Sonics. But yeah, I never saw any ending at all on the Sega.
Mike Schofield. What are you playing currently?
Yeah, so it's almost not worth mentioning, but like my almost 2 year strong weekly D&D night continues. And so I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
Board games. I don't think I've done a ton other than board games. With my kids, we played Dungeons and Dragons, and I introduced them to like Pandemic over the summer.
Nice. Oh, that's a great game.
Which was a ton of fun, especially because they're we're devastated by the pandemic winning.
Which we named the red disease COVID-19.
Yeah, I think we did too. And the black disease was like the zombie virus.
Nice.
It was an awful pandemic. But then like video game wise, I've been going back to first I should be playing the latest Life is Strange. I downloaded it. It's there. I'm waiting to play it. I love that series. But I keep going back to like For Honor because it feels good to like swing a sword in that game. You guys, like Tim, you haven't played it. Have you guys ever played For Honor?
I've not.
I don't
It's
know what it is.
For Honor is a fighting game that has I want to say it's like realistic weapons fighting, but you have to have your guard in the right spot to block, and it's about timing, and it feels like you have to practice to get good. And I like those games, and it's just a great fighting game. And so I've been playing
That
it.
sounds kind of like Bushido Blade or like Vagrant Story.
Yeah,
where you
that's what I
have
was
to
thinking.
really focus on how to block and parry and
It's really similar, or even something like Chivalry 2, where you have to like raise your shield or you're going to get an arrow in the face. But it's one of those things that I think like I like the material. Like I like knights fighting samurai. I think it's cool.
Oh, right.
But I like that you have to be good. You have to practice to be good. And it's actually it feels like something that's actually kind of like merit based, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you kind of earn your wins, and that feels excellent, frankly, in a multiplayer.
Nice. Oh, there is a board game. I haven't played it in a while, but I think one of my favorites is I forget the publisher. It's got like a red bird on it, but the game is Above and Below, and then they also did Near and Far, Islebound, and there's another one. It's a smaller game, but Above and Below and Near and Far are both like worker placement games, but they have a whole thing of like there's a storybook that goes along with it, and when you like in the Above and Below, when you venture into the underground, you like draw a random card and you roll a die, and then it tells you which encounter you get, and then someone reads it, and then there's usually like some narrative, and then you have to make a choice, and you have to roll a test using the workers that you brought with you, and then stuff happens, but there's also like you purchasing buildings and doing other things, but it's a neat like mixture of like storytelling but also like worker placement, and then Near and Far is similar to that but on a larger scale. Like there's a countryside you're exploring, and that's got more of like an RPG kind of thing. Like there's even like a legacy mode where you have a character and they level up and get abilities and stuff. The art is just beautiful. I love the art for these games.
We've transitioned into you mentioned Pandemic, and it just made me think we've got Pandemic Legacy on the shelf, like waiting. See it there, and it's like I want to touch it. I want to play with it, but we haven't gotten there yet.
What are you waiting for, man? Like we literally just lived through lockdown.
Yeah.
No, I actually played Pandemic 1 week before lockdown. Like we had friends over, like a couple, and we had dinner. I think we made crock-pot lasagna or something, and we're like, what are we going to play? And we played Pandemic, and it was just when they started to say, like, oh, I think there's COVID-19 in this thing, and then literally the very, like, 2 days later is when kind of the lockdown and everything happened. And so we now have this memory between two of our friends and, you know, me and my partner, and that remember when the pandemic kicked off with us playing Pandemic?
We're gonna blame you, Tim. That's where COVID-19 came from.
We've gotten on a big legacy game kick in our group because we went through around Christmas time and destroyed Betrayal Legacy in like over the course of literally 2 straight days.
Is that the Betrayal in the House on Haunted Hill?
Yeah. And
that's such a good one.
oh, it's so good.
What's legacy mode like?
Is that the expansion, or is that
a full legacy version of the game? And it is, if you like Betrayal on the House on the Hill, get it. If you like legacy games, get it. If you like both of those things, definitely get it.
Nice.
The start of that game and the middle of that game have 2 of my favorite points in gaming I've ever ran into. The people they had do the game design on that and think about, like, because a story game like Betrayal has like this, it literally has a story, and it feels very much like an American Horror Story kind of theme that kind of runs through each round of the game, because it's the same people but in different kind of situations and stuff like that. And they really thought about how that would go. The setup is so good. I was caught off guard. I was surprised. Like, you know how hard it is to get into a game like that and genuinely be, like, delighted? You know, in UX...
So for someone who knows, like, what I'm sorry, not Baldur. I was about to say Betrayal at Baldur's Gate, which I like too, but Betrayal at House on the Hill, when you're saying, like, the legacy, what is that exactly?
So it's
sure.
basically a game where it's meant to be played over time, and as you play it over time, the game changes. You put stickers on the board, you scratch off stuff on certain cards or put things on certain cards. You'll throw stuff away. Like,
so the legacy aspect is that it's like mutable, that changes.
Right.
You actually change the game as you play.
And unlike
that's
some
cool.
legacy games, once you're done with it, it's still a playable game. Like, you can then continue to replay it over and over. It's just now your version of Betrayal, and it just plays like a normal Betrayal on House on the Hill type of
cool.
game. It was so good. Like, it got everything right. I'm trying to think of like a moment where we were playing and a mechanic that just didn't work right or something, and it just didn't hit those notes wrong anywhere.
That's good.
Now, I don't have a ton of my legacy game experience right now is limited to Betrayal and Gloomhaven, and I haven't, like I say, Pandemic's waiting. It's there. I'm gonna get to it.
When are you gonna play it? When's that gonna happen?
Soon-ish. I don't know.
I haven't played it, but I have friends who have, and they really enjoyed it.
Is Twilight Imperium considered legacy then? Because I know it takes a long, long time to play it, but I don't know if it's technically legacy.
I think legacy is when you change the game itself, right?
Yeah.
Oh, then no. I think it just takes a really crazy long time to play Twilight Imperium.
Like Android or Axis and Allies.
I remember when I was growing up, my dad told me about this game. It was, I think it was made by Avalon Hill, but it was like a Pacific Theater air combat, like battle simulation game, and the mat for it was like 15 feet by 15 feet. And they would start it at the beginning of the summer, and it would take literally all summer long, and they wouldn't finish because there was like so much intricacy with the turns.
It's on my bucket list to play Twilight Imperium, and I've seen 1, 2, and the 3rd version now, and it is notorious in the world as being one of the most complicated. It makes me think of like Parks and Recreation, where they have the cones of Dunshire or something like that. Where it's just like there's so many rules and so many pieces and so much going on that it just like, it takes you 3 months to play the game.
Complex doesn't have to mean long though, right? Like or hard. I think of games like Dominant Species, which Dominant Species ranked real high there on Board Game Geeks for a while, and it's a game that, like, when you spread it out and you look at it and you read that rule book, it feels like, oh my god, there is so much going on here. And when I played it, that's a game that I think, and I don't know what their playtesting regimen was like, but I feel like whatever they did in that cycle, they got right. Because the mechanics flow well, it's easy to understand, like, transitioning between different scales and things and growing your species or changing something about the environment. That game is very dense, very complex, but plays like a nice instrument. And then you get into something like Race for the Galaxy, which people love, and I get it. I love Roll for the Galaxy myself, but Race for the Galaxy is good too. But that iconography can be such a dense, like, hard hurdle to get over as a new player, and trying to explain to people, like, when you if you've got 3 people who know Race for the Galaxy and 1 person who's new, the amount of time you have to spend explaining all the iconography to them and everything and what does what and how you play it, that's a stumbling block that I know why they do it. I get why the iconography is important, but it's not new user friendly at all. It's a hard thing.
I remember when my friend taught me Race for the Galaxy, it was so confusing to me that the cards, like, that you would take a card from the deck and put it face down on one of your planets, and that was like the resource that you get from it. Because I'm like, well, wait, does the underside of the card matter at all? Like, and it's just the idea that, like, they were using the cards for 2 different purposes was really hard for me to grasp at the time.
Yeah, I actually was at Origins. It was canceled last year. And I picked up, it looked really great and everyone was playing it, Zombicide.
Yeah.
I don't think I remember that one.
It looks great. The artwork, the miniatures are phenomenal. Like, it's great, and that's what I wanted about the game. And like, everyone looked like they were having fun playing it. And then when I finally got it home and opened up the rule book, it is so dense that I'm just like, okay, we'll just put this at the bottom of the pile, and I'll eventually get to this because this is going to take some time. It's not one of those games that you can find like a YouTube video that teaches you how to play it in 5 to 10 minutes. It is not that casual or easy of a game. And so I feel like I feel there's like some nuance there with, like, well, what is the thing that we can put in front of a player? Maybe a card that they know exactly what they can do in their turn. Or like, okay, here's a sheet that goes in front of the player that explains what all the icons are.
I love those.
Versus, like, how do we simplify through video or through, kind of the game manual, onboarding someone to the game so they can get in and playing and enjoy it, like, sooner rather than later.
I like Zombicide. I know Zombicide.
More games need to include those kinds of handouts. I know they all have, like, the little quick poker card reference things, but, like, there needs to be just, like, a general, like, quick one-sheet summary of, like, what happens on a turn, and I don't think enough games do that. Thankfully, the player community usually makes them, for at least popular games. Those are always really handy to have.
There's a cool concept that I encountered, I think, in some, like, Call of Cthulhu forum for the first time, that in, like, web design, we talk about usability in part in terms of its learnability, like how easy is an interface to learn. Well, the flip side is like your teachability index, and there is this concept that I like, which is how roughly easy is it for an experienced player or like the DM or whatever to explain the rules and get you started. So it's not one of those things. It indicates that like, hey, for starting from scratch, one person, I mean, there's a book and you got to learn it. But if you could have one person who has it all in their head, how quickly can they teach it? It's a different measure than learning it from scratch. And there's some games that are really good at like that.
Teach it in a way where somebody doesn't 10 minutes in say, well, you didn't tell me that. If I had known that, I would have done this entirely differently.
I like how like D&D gets around that. It's like, the DM is like, your rules are the highway.
I'm not a fan of, I'm not a homebrew person, and we can have a whole different episode about that. I am an organized play person. But I feel like we run into the same problem in software development, that we always punt the documentation, training, and instructional designer to the very end. Yeah, we just all the way to the very end, and then we bring them in, and they're like, "Okay, it launches in 2 weeks. You need to do it." And they're like, "I don't even know what the app does. Someone's going to have to walk me through it so I can translate it." And one of the things I'm trying to be more cognizant about, like at the very beginning, is we need to get people on board, who are documentation and training people that can literally understand it as we understand it, as it changes, and then they can help like with contextual help or tooltips or things of that nature, as opposed to just like constantly kicking that can down the road.
Yeah, it's I think it's a constant problem that we see a lot in game design, in documentation, the same way, where it comes back to this notion of who's writing the documentation for who, and how much time are they spending like going over that with people. I mentioned Gloomhaven earlier, and it's a fine game. I know it's real popular with certain folks, and I understand why. The rulebook is also garbage. Like, that rulebook is not good. And they made a lot of decisions about the gameplay that is designed for thematic reasons, which again, I understand, but then they do a poor job articulating in the rulebook. They'll name things like, you can have things like, well, that you're strengthened or you're muddled. And they'll have effects like this that really what they mean is you are advantaged or disadvantaged. They all have the same effect. You either draw 2 cards and keep the best one, or draw 2 cards and keep the worst one. But they called it a bunch of different things because, well, it makes sense that you're going to have this effect or that effect, and I get that. But when I have to spend time in the rule book as we're playing, it hurts, It really slows down the fun, having to go through these rules and figure out, what does this word mean? You're using this like a keyword. So I'm looking for that keyword in the rule book, and you're not using that word anywhere in the rule book. That stuff is really gnarly.
Yeah. I actually love, like, one of my metrics for board games, niche tabletop board games, right? That I like is onboarding is easy. There's other ones I like, but it's just like, how quick can we start to play and how understandable it is. And kind of circling back to like one of the games that I'm obsessed with right now, not looking at I'm currently obsessed with Starfinder and Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I just went to a con and played like 5 games for 5 hours each, like 25 hours of gaming over the weekend.
Nice.
And I'm actually playing through. Mike Schofield challenged me to play through Mass Effect Legendary Edition.
One of the greatest games of all time.
Yeah, and I'm on 3 right now. And so we're just about to start 3, but tabletop board game, I don't know if you know it. It's ranked really well. I bought it, I've played it, and I'm obsessed with it. Psycho Killer.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
This is new to me.
Yeah.
I was just going to do that.
I was going to say that. Psycho Killer is literally Uno.
Can we play 10 seconds of that in our podcast without copyright strike?
Just the fa
I think it's like 6 seconds. Yeah. But it is I'm doing it injustice by calling it Uno, but it's essentially like kind of that exploding kittens kind of, you're just controlling the flow of the cards. Is it reversing or skipping or backing, But it's got a lot of cool mechanics. And the theme that's wrapped around it is like 80s slasher horror.
This looks amazing.
You were like collecting wounds and weapons, and then you're trying to like survive and be the person who's not killed or wounded the most, and I cannot recommend this game enough. And the reason why I say it is because its video that they created for onboarding to learn you how to play it, and its instruction guide is like the best example of instructional design for a game I've seen recently.
Nice. I think that you mentioned earlier about like actually no, Michael was talking about the keyword thing. Like, is this a keyword? I'm going to look for it in other places, and that's something like when I'm writing either a procedural or like if I'm writing rules text or something. I try to be very careful about what words I use to describe things, because if a mechanic is the same, you should call it the same thing each time so that you can reduce the cognitive load of the person trying to learn the game. And in games that have like explicit names for different concepts, and those concepts are unique to those things, those are great. And when you have games, and I'm trying to think of one that like does this poorly, and I'm having trouble thinking of one, but I definitely noticed it a lot, like in rules text though, when they just get too verbose, and it's clear they didn't have an editor, or at least not an editor who was familiar with like games, like game
Tannhauser. Tannhauser has that problem. You will never play that game, don't worry. But just trust me, the rule book is the rule book is a crime.
Well, actually, like, did any of you play second edition D&D?
Oh yes.
Okay, remember Thaco armor class?
Yeah. Two-hit armor class 0.
Yeah, and like carrying weight and like encumbrance and like all of that. The saving throws were weird. Like everything about that felt so like overly specific, and like third edition fixed a lot of that by making everything positive bonuses. I think that was like a big improvement. And then
I feel so triggered right now.
Oh, sorry.
I feel so triggered. I spent the majority of like my youth probably in second edition, and I know that the final like screw this game moment where everyone flipped the table is like when they literally added psionics. And people were like, no, and they were just. I have the brown handbook for that upstairs in the second edition. Player's Guide to Psionics, or Player's Handbook to Psionics. Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask everyone here is generally, it sounds like we all have a lot of experience with UX and a lot of experience with games, but I think the question that I kind of want to know is, it doesn't matter if it's a board game, video game, tabletop game, live action, whatever. I just want to know kind of what is the first thing that pops into your frontal cortex or your brain about what is a really usable game, one that you were just impressed with, like everything, like artwork, instructions, gameplay, enjoyment is just like at that top of the list for you.
In terms of like quality of UX, like
very just enjoyable, usable. What is the honeycomb? Pretty much like all of the metrics, all the checkboxes on the honeycomb.
High desirability, low accessibility.
Yeah.
So there's two games that come to mind when I think about like if I'm meeting up with a group of people who maybe have varying levels of experience with games, right? So maybe they've played a bunch, maybe they haven't. You're not really sure. It's going to be a mixed bag. The two games that I think I always have with me are Splendor, which I mentioned before, and Camel Up, also Camel Cup. Either one, even in German, either one is okay. The board game designer that made it says so. Camel Up, Camel Cup, the same. The reason why is because in both games, the actions that you can take on each turn are like limited to like 4, maybe 5 different possibilities. It's really easy to like grasp just those 4 or 5 things, and And you can basically take any of those actions in any turn with like minimal risk, or like you're not going to screw yourself for the later of the game, majorly at least. You can just do stuff to advance the game forward so that you can interact with the game without having to make a whole lot of like mental calculations or anything. Also, the artwork on both of them is great. Splendor's artwork is beautiful, and Camel Up's artwork is very thematic and like kind of fun. And Camel Up does a really great job with reinforcing the theme of like you're betting on camel races. And the other thing I really love about Camel Up is that the game is so absurdly swingy. I've seen the have you played it before?
I have not. I've not played either of those two, so I'm actually going to have to add them to the list.
Okay, so I'll give you like the 20-second synopsis. It's a race with 5 different colored camels. They go 1 lap around a track, and while they're going and they're moving, everyone's making bets on the progress of the race until it finally ends, and then that ends the game. So there's mechanics in the game that affect like catch up and like how the camels like progress on the track. And I've seen games where the camel that was in dead last ended up winning because the dice just came out in a certain order. And man, I'm not exaggerating when I say that when I played this with my family and that happened, there were literally hoots and hollers and like scream. Like it was really exciting, and it was like, holy shit, this is what's happened.
Nice.
The long shot nobody was expecting just suddenly jumped into first and then won. It's a really great game. It won Spiel des Jahres in 2015 or thereabouts. I think one other honorable mention, Condottiere is a beautiful game with beautiful artwork. The original release of it had like Tarocchi-sized cards, like the real tall columnar cards. It's like a bidding game for territory control of Reconstruction era Italy. Unfortunately, it's not an easy one to explain, and makes it harder to introduce to people. But when you play with people who know the game, though, it's so much fun. There's just a whole like, when you know the game and you're playing other people who know the game, there's a whole layer of like, oh, well, they played that card, which means they probably do or don't have this. And like, you have to like get behind the hand and really kind of read their minds. And it's a lot of fun. It's a really great game. It's just not easy to teach to someone in 5 minutes. Like maybe like 20 minutes to explain it.
So then it goes to you, Michael
S.
S.
This is the kind of thing I should have prepared for a little better.
Oh no, I kind of want to. It's like what pops into the front of your mind.
Yeah, no, here's the thing, right? There are a lot of games I really enjoy, and there are games I play a lot of that I also would not consider necessarily good games, right? Like, it's like movies. There are movies that I watch that are total trash that I would never recommend to somebody, but they give me some kind of like visceral enjoyment. How about this? So I've already given you a love letter to Chinatown. I do think Chinatown is a game that anybody who likes Monopoly and wants more, a lot of folks would say, there's a lot of love for Catan as sort of the gateway game. Like if you feel like you've outgrown Monopoly and you want to go a different direction but not get something hard that people can, still kind of get into, Catan served as that for a long time. I would go ahead and throw Chinatown as a gateway game. Another gateway game that I think pretty much gets most everything about itself right. It knows what it is. It's easy to get new people in. It's fun with people who really know how to play it. Is Kill Dr. Lucky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Kill Dr. Lucky is... So Clue. Kill Dr. Lucky is the first half of Clue. Clue is all about figuring out who killed the guy, where, and with what. Kill Dr. Lucky is all about get in a room with the guy and kill him with something. And not be seen.
How have I not heard of this?
I know,
This
is amazing.
It's not complex. It has a very simple mechanic. The old guy is walking around his house. However many people are in there are trying to get in rooms. You've got line of sight to consider, and you get cards. And it's all about... And everybody else has spoiler cards. So you're like, I'm going to kill him with the hammer. And somebody throws a card. It's like... The dog goes running through the house, and so like your attempt is spoiled, and you build up points for every spoiled attempt. So over time, you will eventually have enough points that somebody is going to outweigh the number of spoiler cards that everybody plays on you.
I've seen this before. I said that I misspoke when I said I've not played it. I haven't played it, but I've seen it been played before at a gaming con.
It's
Is
fun.
this the one that is like a print and play? They have a print and play version.
I don't know if they do or not. I've got the full version of it. But it's a relatively cheap game, and I want to say Walmart carries it now. Like it's that like mainstream as far as things go. But it's a well thought out game, and I like that they did this idea of like I say the first half of Clue, because that makes it feel very like grounded in something that people do know. A lot of people know Clue, even if they haven't played Clue, they're familiar with it. So I think it reduces the amount of anxiety they may have about getting into this game and I'm gonna suck at it because I don't know the rules. It's my first time. A hard game and I'm trying to think if I really consider this to be a game that gets things like mostly right. And given the amount that we play it and the amount of fun we have with it, I'm gonna say yes. That's Lords of Waterdeep.
Oh,
Love it.
I love that game.
God, that is literally the one I was going to say.
Okay, well then I'm right. I get another gold star. Thank you.
I love totaling games, and I don't even know if they're called that. Is that the mechanic? But like Ticket to Ride and other games to where you're like, you don't know until the end, until everyone like reveals all their cards. And I was working on this railroad, or I had this quest, or like, and so it's always kind of exciting. At that last 5 minutes, because you're kind of seeing what everyone did, and you weren't even aware the whole game that they were working on X.
You have that opportunity at the end, like even if you're in last, it's like it's not out of reach because I still have this stuff in the bank, and I know I'm gonna jump 20 points, whatever. But there's also a lot to it. There's a lot of gameplay to it. Thematically, it's very rich because it's got a lot of the D&D stuff to draw on. So there's a lot of like grit to it for people who enjoy that kind of world. So I mean, those I had another like easy game, and now I just simply don't remember what I was going to throw out there. But those two I think are definitely high. They're easy to pull out. They always get like good marks from folks whenever they get into them. I like other games like Firefly. Firefly is great. It takes 18 hours to play.
I was just gonna say, I love the Firefly game, and my son and I play it sometimes. But it drips with flavor. If you've seen the show and you love the show, you'll love the game. But holy shit, like there is nothing in the game that drives itself to completion. So you can literally just fly around the verse and run missions and stuff and have fun, and then just decide when you're done playing. And that's actually a totally legit way to play that game.
And I have every expansion. You need a dining room table and 2 leaves and extra table space if you have all the expansions.
It's gigantic.
Like, to me, like that makes it not really that great as a result. I like Mansions of Madness. I think the second version is better. The second edition is definitely an improvement on the first edition, because it's another game that. There's a lot of these games that they're really fun thematically, but Arkham Horror kind of falls into this a little bit. Like, man, it's fun, but I'm 39 years old now. I don't want to stay up till 4 a.m. playing it. So that kind of hurts it for me. So I'll leave it with those two then. We got Lords of Waterdeep, and we've got Kill Dr. Lucky.
I'll have to choose another one because you took Lords of Waterdeep from me. So I've got more, so it's no problem.
I love how you explain Kill Dr. Lucky as the first half of Clue, like Clue before Clue happens. Yeah. And I feel like that explains so much of the mechanics behind the game that you have like an instant understanding of what the game is before you even.
It's a great elevator pitch. Yeah, it's wonderful.
What I want to see somebody do, I don't know if this is even possible, but I want to see one group play Kill Dr. Lucky, and then the second group play Clue based on the outcome of Kill Dr. Lucky.
That'd be awesome.
My friends and I once played a game of Risk where every time you attempt to take a territory, instead of rolling dice, it turns into a game of Stratego. We did not make it through a whole game of Risk this way, but
I love it. I love it so much. This appeals to my wargaming instincts. I love it. Oh my god.
Well, like the stratego pieces you get are based on how many armies you're attacking with,
That's
proportionally.
great. This is a great.
And so
homebrew.
you have to kind of like you draft them, etc. And
Oh no, I don't have a marshal.
yeah,
I love it. I gotta play this.
What about you, Michael Schofield?
Yeah.
Like, what did
My,
I may know this already, so I'm not going to say anything.
I mean, there are a few. The games that I love that I think have like what I'd call a net positive UX necessarily imply that there's things about it that really suck and are hard to get into. I've actually got 3. And I just have to name drop these. Like in terms of like board games, the one that I love, I think maybe out of nostalgia because it's, it's a super goth game. It's one of those that are like highly themed. It's the first game I really played that had like in the second edition that had like miniatures with it. Right? It was like a high production value board game, and I love it. And it's The Fury of Dracula, where you for the most part are probably a vampire hunter chasing Dracula himself across the old world, and one of the players is Dracula, and there's like day and night cycles. So during the day, you and 3 other compatriots work collaboratively to locate Dracula, kill his undead minions, basically drive a stake through his heart. But then night happens, and Dracula can flee to the next city, create a whole bunch of like vampire spawn, and just otherwise escape, but also spread the dark seed across like the Victorian Europe. And it's wonderful, and it's timed, and there's only like eight nights. You got like a week to do it, and then it's over, and then Dracula wins. Same thing with Pandemic. It's like I like the idea that the bad guy wins. It's really cool. It's just a cool theme. But in terms of like, but I was really racking my brain because like, what's like the most usable game, which suggests something to me other than like most fun. And I was just kind of like going through my my library, and this one's like a video game, but I want to give a shout out. I don't know if this ranks anywhere, really, if I really had to make a hardcore list, but this one like stood out to me, and I was like, this is a great UX. Have you guys like played Valiant Hearts?
No.
It's a side-scrolling World War I love story game.
Okay.
And it came out like across you can get it on your iPad or your Xbox or PS4 or whatever.
Those are like 3 different things that I never would imagine being mushed together.
So the idea, like at the heart of it, is like a story. It's a love story between like a French, like an elderly French farmer, his daughter, and his daughter is in love with an Austrian farmhand. And then the Great War starts, and the Austrian farmhand gets drafted, and the French elderly father also gets drafted, and you play kind of like cartoonish. It's they do it like really respectfully, but like a cartoonish campaign on both sides through the Great War until they either reunite or they don't. No spoilers, but that's the kind of story. Can you survive the war long enough to get reunited with your love, or to get back to your daughter, or whatever? And sometimes you play as a dog. It's there's a lot in there. But in terms of usability, like great. Super cartoony, like friendly comic book thing that you might find in like in the children's part of the library, right? It has like great hints, and it has like great mechanics like that. And it's just a side scroller. The controls are really easy, but it's treacherous because you have to like evade bombs, watch out for mines, watch out for mustard gas. It's really pretty gruesome, and sprinkled throughout this kind of comic booky World War I game are like little like postcards of real history. That show like, hey man, this is a bad time, and stuff like that. I totally recommend it. Like for the folks who like to play games on their screen. It's one of those things where like my son played it at age 7.
Oh wow!
And Yeah, because it was on my iPad or whatever, and he played through it, and he was really interested in it, and he walked away knowing something about the Great War, and he cried at the end. You know,
Aw.
it was a good experience, right? That a kid can just pick up and play, but really heavy concept. And it's just one of those things that, like, I can't really think of a whole lot else that does that. Anyway, like I said, I just found this like scrolling through my library, and I was like, oh my god, I totally forgot about this game. And it's one of the, I don't know, like you think about like the UX Honeycomb or any of those models, it like fleshes out the entire circle. It's really good. Put it on your radar.
Nice. I've actually have Fury of Dracula on my Amazon wishlist.
Do you? It's usually like out of print. I know you've talked about
it a lot, and it's rated pretty decently on Board Game Geek. And I love that. I, as you know, love asynchronous horror, and it's like asynchronous horror in the form of a board game. So it's kind of like Betrayal at House on the Hill, to where, hey, we're all friends, and then, oh, I touched a voodoo artifact, and now I'm a witch, or a zombie, or a mummy, or whatever.
I do think I had Fury of Dracula on my wish list at one point, and it went out of print, and I took it off. But I'm looking at the map now, and yeah, I think I know this game. I think it was on an episode of Tabletop. Yeah.
Yes, that's where I learned about it too. Yeah.
Nice.
Could I give a quick shout out to a game whose board game version was terrible UX, but the app game version was awesome? Have any of you played Elder Signs?
Yes. Oh, yes. I've got all of it.
Cthulhu Yahtzee. Yeah. So
that's exactly what it is.
Tabletop version, I have it, and I've played it a bunch. I even have like a little field notes book that has like every time I play it, we write down like which was the elder god and did we win or lose, who was playing, etc. But man, so much table maintenance. And the app version, which I actually played before I played the tabletop version, the app version fixes so much of the game that makes it so much more fun, and you could focus a lot more on like the dice rolling aspect, which is a lot more interesting than maintaining the table state. So kudos to the development team.
Did you advance the clock? Did you remember to move the clock up 3 hours?
Did
you forget that? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Yes. That's happened a lot.
I don't think. I'm pretty sure that was one of the games, like Sheriff of Nottingham, or it was one of those ones where I'm like, fuck this game, I'm done. This is like, this is too, I don't care about it anymore.
If you like Cthulhu games, you have to be a little bit of a masochist. Many of them are very good, but they all hurt. All of them take a toll on you in one way or another.
They do. They do.
It's
100%.
So meta.
I have strong feelings about Cthulhu games. So.
I like the idea that they're intentionally obtuse games.
I will have to say, for mine, from the tabletop perspective, it has to be. I love, even though I think if I got a group of people together, I would want to play in a collaborative board game. So everyone's always thinking like Forbidden Desert or something to where we're all working together and it's fun. But I'm competitive, and if it is the right group of people, I love me some Munchkin, and I love me some King of Tokyo or King of New York. What I love about, and Munchkin's great because it's like a simplified Dungeons and Dragons to where you're a base character and you add your sex, your class, your race, and your armor and everything to it, and you kind of bump it up. And there's so many flavors of Munchkin now that it's just like Monopoly, to where it's just like made every single version of it. But I'm sure you've played Munchkin. Yes. But if you've not played, I'm not sure if you've played King of New York or King of Tokyo. It is one of those games to where it's like, I just want a bunch of big dice and I want to slam them down and like attack everyone else at the table. And I want to give the monster I have a third head and eye lasers and like wings so I can like mutate him to like dominate and destroy all the other players. And it's just so gratifying that you roll these dice that have claws on them for attacks, and it's just physical. And that's, I guess, what I really like about that game. And I don't know anyone who's played the game and not had a blast. It's so user experience or player experience wise, I think a lot of people just want to be a giant monster that like destroys cities and like fights other giant monsters to the death.
You named two games there between King of New York and Forbidden Desert that Also, interestingly, the sort of bigger version, quote unquote, is definitely the better version. Like if you buy the base version, then buy the advanced version, you discover you never play the base version. King of Tokyo, though, did a good job of saying, but you have all these monsters, and you can use all these monsters and everything in the bigger version. So they brought it along, and Forbidden Desert did not do that with Forbidden Island. So it's like, if you want to play Forbidden Desert or something like that, you'll almost never go back to Forbidden Island once you have it.
Yeah.
The thing I like about the King of Tokyo is that the mechanic around who gets pulled into the city, like, you go into the city, okay, now everyone's hitting you and you're hitting everyone until you choose to leave. But then when you choose to leave, whoever hit you is the person that has to go in. So the game is always pushing forwards.
Has to be someone in the ring. You can't have the ring unoccupied, And what I think I like about Munchkin, and the thing that I like that's similar between Munchkin and King of Tokyo is I love the add-ons. You can add, like, you can play Cthulhu, you can play King Kong, you can add like all this stuff. But then with Munchkin, apart from the different games, which I have played a bunch of the different flavors of Munchkin, but Munchkin Zombie is by far the best. So instead of the normal Munchkin where you're kicking in the door, fighting the monster and getting the treasure, you're kicking in the door, eating the person, and it puts you in that play, and it's so gratifying to like eat accountants and teenagers and cops and neighbors and and you have, instead of the classes or races that you have in traditional like Dungeons and Dragons or high fantasy that's in the core Munchkin, you have this kind of the zombies Munchkins are like, oh, are you a toxic energy like zombie, or are you a voodoo zombie, or are you a radiation zombie? And so it kind of goes. But I love the fact that you can, if you do like the game, you can add supplemental, kind of monsters and cards and stuff to it. And I feel like those games don't have a huge learning curve, and they are always quick. They're always done within an hour.
Yeah.
So
Smash Up's kind of like that too. It's got that like, hey, which expansion sets you want to add to your set and everything, and change the way things feel. And it's kind of got a fun little.
Unicorns and Transformers. Those are the two you want to put together, because that's like the ultimate speed attack if you have unicorns and Transformers. You all are coming up almost on your 100th episode. And I just listened to your WordPress episode on Drunken UX Podcast. The WordPress episode was great, actually, because as someone who's been kind of working with it for years and like, this is what I always do versus like what you can do or what other people's setups are, was kind of neat. And I guess I want to plug, kind of as we're wrapping up, I know how I would describe the Drunken UX Podcast, but I don't know, like, if you have, like, if there's people out there who haven't heard of you, I mean, how would you describe your podcast?
So everybody has not heard of us. That's kind of the way that goes. Now, I tell folks, Drunken UX is the show is not about UX. The Drunken UX is about the listener's experience with us. We're sitting there because we're two middle-aged men from the elder millennial generation, so obviously we have to have a podcast where we sit and drink. But we do talk UX, we talk accessibility, we talk design, development, from the technical to the non-technical. And it's all about, if you are somebody who is interested in web development, interested in web design, how people get into those positions, what those journeys look like, and what you need to be thinking about to get further. That's what we like leaning into a lot. We try to keep things light. If you're high tech, if you're deep in the field and you love syntax and you love Web Developer T and those shows, fantastic. They're all great. We aren't them.
It's a different kind of
they
show.
Are fantastic, and they have their niche. They know their stuff. We take a lower brow approach a little bit, I guess. And
I wouldn't say lower brow. Like we're not being prurient with our humor.
More casual.
We're just maybe Yeah, that's
definitely
better.
casual, but we have fun with it, and that's we do bring in guests as frequently as possible to talk about what they're building, what they're excited about. We just had Kellen Mason from WP Engine to talk about the headless WordPress stuff. That was a fantastic talk. That really, it just helps expand the understanding of what you can do with all of these tools that are out there. From, is it WordPress? Is it, the way you go about user research? Is it how you think about, making your site available to people that, have different abilities? That stuff's important to us, and so we enjoy sharing it. If anybody wants to check it, we have new episodes every other Monday. We're at drunkenux.com. Search for Drunken UX in your podcast thing. We're on all the things. And yeah, we have this sort of convergence. Episode 100 is going to come out, and we've got some stuff we're going to be announcing there. And then in 3 more months, the season 4 finale has to come out. So I've got to I need to figure out what we're announcing for the 100 and what we're doing for the finale. So I don't know. Stay tuned. It's going to be a surprise to me too.
The finale will just be like the amazing stuff that's happened since the 100th episode announcements, right? Like that's obviously what goes there.
We got picked up by Spotify. We signed a major label. No.
Joe Rogan of UX.
God, actually, other than I guess if you replace all of the cannabis with alcohol, that's probably not far off.
So tell me about the UX of aliens.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I the one thing I really like about our show is the casual tone, but I think that a lot of the newer podcasts with the young people showing up in it. Yeah,
younger people.
They have fantastic ideas and they are so innovative and moving forwards. And I think that Michael and I have a lot of experience, and I think that from that experience, it helps inform us to talk about more nuanced things like accessibility and usability, because those are sort of you really have to have a keen understanding of HTML and of how websites function and things to kind of really grok that. And that's something that I think that is a perspective that we both bring to it.
A nice way of saying we've earned the gray in our beards.
Yeah, I don't have much of a beard, but I do have gray hairs in it, so.
We definitely appreciate you both gracing us on this episode.
Oh yeah,
and
totally.
I love talking about the intersection of user experience and games, and thank you both for being on. This has been fantastic.
Bet, anytime, man.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, totally.
You have an open invitation going forward. If you ever want to just sit and talk about games and user experience, you're always welcome.
Nice.
We put a lot of work into design thinking games, so if you like what we do and want to help us cover some costs, then consider supporting us at patreon.com/designthinkinggames. We also are Design Thinking Games on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter.
Thank you for listening to the Design Thinking Games podcast. To connect with your hosts, Michael or Tim, please go to designthinkinggames.com, where you can request topics, ask questions, or see what else is going on. Until next time, game on.